If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths, and sometimes heights, to ensure the power is always flowing. Which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
When you visit Arizona, time is measured in moments, not minutes. Like the moment your work stress disappears as you kayak through the canyons. Or the moment you discover the life-changing effects of prickly pear chocolate. But nothing beats the moment you see the Grand Canyon for the very first time. Visit a new state of mind. Learn more at hereyouareaz.com.
Blog Talk Radio.
All right, good evening, everybody. Audio ran a little bit long. Good evening and welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm your host, Ted Odorico. Got a great show for you tonight. We're going to be starting off here in just a few moments with another great round of Coach's Corner, and got a couple of great guys that are going to be on the show tonight, and I'll introduce those guys in just a moment. And then a little bit later on, I'm very excited to have my very special guest on this evening. He's been a golf announcer for many, many years, known as The Voice. Of course, I'm talking about Mr. Peter Kessler. Who you may all recall was one of the original, if not the first, host on the Golf Channel when it first made its debut some years ago. And he's going to be joining me on the second half of the show, so I'm very excited about having him on the program tonight. And I just want to take a quick note to let everybody know that we are live every Thursday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. Central here on the blogtalkradio.com network. And as always, the easiest way to find us is to go to blogtalkradio.com, and up in the search key, just type Golf Talk Live, or you can just do a forward slash, and add Golf Talk Live on the end to that link, and that'll take you to the live broadcast every Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. Central, or 7 to 9 for those of you on the East Coast. But for some reason, if you can't join us live, not to worry. You can just visit that link and just scroll down to the on-demand section. Of course, all of the live broadcasts are auto-recorded, so you can check those out when it's convenient for you. Or you can also go to iTunes.com or Stitcher.com, and under the podcast section, again, you can just type in Golf Talk Live, and that will take you there as well. Always look forward to speaking with my guests, and if you want to call in and talk to my guests at any time during our Thursday night live broadcast, you're welcome to do so. The number to call is area code 646-716-4667. Or you can easily email me any questions or comments about the show to ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. If you're somebody in the golf industry, maybe you're a teacher professional or a golf coach, or maybe you're an entrepreneur or somebody that maybe has written a great golf book that you want to share with the audience, that you think you've got some great tips in the book that you'd like to share, by all means, you can also reach out to me at that email. And again, it's ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. And as always, each and every week I update on social media, Facebook page. You can go on to, my personal page, or you can also go to facebook.com/Golf Talk Live blog, and the show, of course, is updated every week there on social media. Also on Twitter, my Twitter handle is Ted and Buck CEO in capital letters. And again, thank you for all the recent followers there. You can also get updates on the show there, and also on my personal page on LinkedIn.com. That's LinkedIn.com. You can just type in Ted Odorico, and that will bring you there as well. As I said, got a great show tonight. Two great gentlemen going to be joining me on here on the Coach's Corner panel. Let me just tell you a little bit about each of them. John Hughes, he's a PGA Master Professional and the Vice President of the North Florida PGA Section. as well as the 2013 PGA of America Horton Smith Award recipient, and he's also a top 30 instructor with Golf Tips magazine. Also joining at the panel is Peter Egazarian. He's been on the show many, many times as well. He's a PGA and TPI teaching professional at the Traconic Golf Club, and he's also the head men's golf coach, with the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. He's also the founder of Northeast Golf Performance and a member of the Proponent Group. And I would say, guys, welcome to Coach's Corner, but I'm going to say it just to you, Peter, because John's not quite on board yet, so we'll wait for him to come on. But Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ted. Great to be here.
All right, before we start, you were telling me some exciting news, so if you're ready to share that. If not, we'll jump into something else. But if you'd like to share that with the audience, kind of give them a sneak peek and some things that you've been working on and getting ready, obviously, for next year. If you want to share that, by all means, go to it while we wait for John.
Yeah, of course. It just wrapped up a fabulous golf season at Traconic Golf Club. Taking a little break for some family time right now, but mainly getting ready to kind of reveal the renovated indoor facility outside Springfield, just replacing some turf, netting, really upgrading just the overall facility. And also going to be opening a brand new performance studio in North Adams, Massachusetts. It's a repurposed mill space. The floor just got refinished. Everything is really progressing nicely. Very high-end turf, TrackMan hitting bay, pretty large putting green, nice sin lawn turf. That's really excited about it. That's going to be a year-round facility, just to complement my work at Traconic during the season and also in the off-season. We just sold out our junior elite program, so that's full with a waiting list already. We're just about 3 weeks away from opening and starting that program, and have just about 100 people who have requested information for either North Adams or Springfield area. So it's a pretty exciting time, and just looking forward to getting back on.
Fantastic. And Peter, when's the facility going to be completed? Do you have a date at this point that it's going to be ready right and open for business?
Yeah, we're going to have an open house for North Adams on December 2nd from noon to 2 in North Adams. I don't know if I said that, and then in Wilbraham, which is outside Springfield, that's going to be on December 3rd, also from noon to 2. At both, we're going to have some food, some beverages, some music, and people can come sample the space, sample the technology. We'll have TrackMan and KVS there, as well as a new fitness product called 3X Slide, which is really the world's only 3D slide board. It's circular. A lot of the slide boards that you see now are very linear and just go back and forth. This actually allows you to slide and train on a three-dimensional plane. So pretty excited about that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'll bet. Very exciting. And congratulations on all of that, and keep us posted as well as when everything gets launched. I'll be more than happy to spread the word. I'm all about newness. I mean, I like it when people within the industry, fellow professionals, and that are always engaging and doing something new and exciting. And I think it's great that we share and let not only other professionals, but obviously the folks out there that are going to get an opportunity to attend the facility and get in there and take advantage of some of the great technology and, of course, some of the great instruction. And
I'm looking forward to having. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having some of our, my fellow professionals in the area there as well for, informal collaborative time. Maybe have a couple beverages, hit some balls together, talk about some things, and then potentially learn in a more informal setting. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be really fun. Just kind of set dates, show up if you can. Bring your clubs. Let's chat.
Right.
Let's learn from each other.
Yeah, and that's a great way really to introduce it. It's sort of a low pressure, great way to get people involved in something. A lot of folks, especially new golfers to the industry or to the game, sometimes can be very intimidated. And I like the fact that, you're kind of keeping it low key, bring your sticks, come on out and have a great time and it's sort of a relaxed environment. But if they really want to, step up their game, there's that there for them as well. But, again, I like that sort of a low pressure or almost really no pressure. Just come on out and take advantage of some of the great technology and that we have at the facility. So that's kudos to you and the rest of them. Peter, while we just have a few more minutes here, I apologize. I guess John is probably on his way home from the golf course or maybe in a late lesson, as I said many times. And that's a good thing. That's good. We're not going to complain. So you and I may have to voice the coach's corner tonight ourselves, but
that's great.
I have
we can carry this.
Yeah, no worries about that. Yeah, listen, we can carry this next hour quite easy. I could probably do it myself if I had to, and I've had to do it a few times. But what I want to ask you before we get into some of the questions is this. Of course, as I mentioned in the opening monologue, is this year, of course, you took on the head men's golf coach position with the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. So how has it been so far? Give us kind of an update on what's been going on and as you're sort of getting your feet wet, if you will, in that new position.
Yeah, I feel as though it was a very successful fall season. From being hired basically on August 1st, we started our season August 28th or 28th. And I just really took the time to get to know the student athletes that were left, were remaining on the team, and got to know them as people and how I can best motivate them and really just progress through the season and help them improve and get better, and just strictly helping them, control their golf ball out on the golf course, whatever it might have been, and whatever their chosen technique, chosen shot they're hitting, preferences in their motion. It didn't matter. It was all about training them to control the golf ball. I mean, we had the full spectrum of our 5-player was a player that was a true freshman, had really played some competitive golf in high school, but this was his first, dive into playing 36-hole competition. And it was a great learning experience for him, and he progressed and got better as the season went on. Our conference championship, he posted his 2 best back-to-back rounds of the year. So, for him going into the spring, there's more confidence there. All the way to one of our graduating seniors who, is an incredible athlete, has a club speed, a driver club speed of 122. He carries at 320. But it was great to see. It was fun on TrackMan, but he had no idea where it was going off the tee or off really anything with speed.
Right.
So, he was shooting a lot higher scores than he felt like. He was frustrated, and got to the end of the year. He was really controlling his golf ball. He was playing golf a lot better, and he felt as though his scores were closer to where he felt like he should be. And just to the point of, the team overall, for our conference championship compared to last year, they improved their 2-day team score by 91 shots.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
so
that's phenomenal.
They really came together as a team. They really supported each other. They were all just, in general, really good guys, really good kids that, came together, got better, and it was just cool to be involved with and, help guide the process. So we're, we're looking forward to a little bit of a spring season here, in the Northeast. We don't get a ton of time, and we need to be done with the season a week before finals, so they have time to study.
Right.
But we have gotten some great offers from some schools in Connecticut, some schools in, the capital region of New York, around Albany and that area, to go compete and get better. And, fortunately, the biggest thing that I see as a win and for the kids is that a lot of the players that had left the team for whatever reason are wanting to come back, compete, be part of the team again. And I see that as the biggest, upside, is that there's going to be more competition between the kids and the players, and it's going to be really good moving forward. I'm pretty confident. So we're going through going through the whole recruiting process and all of that right now as well. So.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting too is, you know, it's a challenge really for both. It's a challenge for the kids that, you know, they're not maybe familiar with you, and you're not familiar with them when you sort of first come into the position. So you've got to kind of you've got to kind of work your personalities together and kind of mesh literally as a team, not just the players but also as the coach as well. Because sometimes, you know, there's going to be differences in coaching styles from one person to another, and also players respond differently to different stimuli. So how was that transition when you first came on board? How was that? Was it a pretty easy fit, or was there sort of some massaging that had to happen along the way?
Well, it was I just genuinely wanted to get to know them as people. You know, I sent out an email to the team, you know, in the beginning, and you know, I just wanted to get to know them. You know, it was getting to, you know, the golf is not secondary, but the golf is kind of the easy part for me to work with and to change the outcome and all of that. It was about finding a commonality, and truthfully, you know, it was about just open communication and them feeling like there was open communication, and there was a commonality between all of the student athletes and myself, is that we all enjoy NFL football.
Right.
So
right.
we ended up there in practice, in between, you know, stations, or if we're on the golf course in between shots, the kids, the student athletes like to keep it light, and we talked about football a lot. And there would be times when I was out there coaching them during an event, and you know, one of them's playing well, and I would just update them on whatever football game happened to be going on, and they relaxed enough to keep their rounds going. And it was more about me listening to them between themselves, and then me helping them stay relaxed so they can perform. Because, you know, from a golf side, we know that tension is a killer to your golf performance. So the best thing I can do is not be out there, you know, up there, you know, what about the next shot they're going to hit, when they know what the next shot they need to hit, because I've already prepared them well enough to know. They need to be relaxed so that they go out and do it. So that was the biggest thing.
Right, and that raises a really interesting point. You know, I think a lot of people have started to realize, even at the professional level, is, you know, you can't be focused solely on golf for 4.5 hours straight nonstop. You have to have something to distract you a little bit. Now, not so much that you get out of the game or out of the round, but at the same time, you've got to be able to, in between shots, give your mental side a little bit of a break. And, you know, it reminds me very quickly of a story that Annika Sorenstam I heard about when she won her first U.S. Open. That was something that was, you know, instilled in her mind, was by a fellow professional, was to, you know, in between shots, to think about something else. And it just happened that she had purchased her first home and was getting ready to you know, make some adjustments there. So she actually was thinking about, you know, things that she wanted to buy and changes that she wanted to make to that home, you know, to make it more comfortable for her in between shots. Now, this is in a major tournament. And what was really kind of interesting, Peter, is that she went on to win that event. So it just goes to show you that sometimes you need to take your mind away from the task at hand, just to give it a breather, let you sort of decompress a little bit. And then when you step up to that next shot, then you re-engage and you refocus until that particular task has been accomplished. And then again, you take a little bit of a breather. So that's a great way to work with your students in that manner. And I'm sure as time goes on and you continue to work together as a team, that'll become more and more paramount in their success at whatever they do. But sometimes you just have to give yourself a little bit of a break and think about something else other than the task at hand. So that's a great acumen for you.
They enjoy
Peter,
it. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, sure. And you know, just to add is, and the fact that it's something other than golf. I mean, you know, that you obviously all love NFL football, and gives them a chance to think about the team and you know, vote a yay or nay on whichever team that they're backing.
Oh,
but,
yeah. I mean, one of the kids, we're in New England. Most of the kids are Patriots fans.
Right.
And one of the kids was a Jets fan.
Sure.
So the
Right.
good nature ribbing back and forth was funny enough. Where I was,
right.
I was driving the van and I'm not saying anything. I'm laughing because it's funny. I mean,
yeah,
they're just giving it back and forth to each other in a nice way, but it's
right.
it's fun. It was fun. It was a fun season.
Yeah. Perfect. All right, Peter. We got to move forward. Unfortunately, as I said, John has been held up. So let's. I've just got a few questions here, and we're going to talk a little bit about in the life of a golf professional, and it's not all necessarily going to be about golf. But I think one of the first questions that I like to ask in this sort of genre, if you will, is who were some of your early influencers in the game? Who sort of really influenced not just your teaching, but just influencing your game in whatever capacity you want?
Good question. I mean, I can go pretty far back. I mean, there's a lot,
Go to the beginning
I started golfing. I started golfing when I was 5, and my grandfather was the one that taught me how to play. And, him regripping, cutting down his set of 85 Wilson blades in my parents' kitchen, and regripping them right there. That's probably my first golf memory, and, just going from there. I mean, I've been really fortunate to be, in the coaching aspect. I've been really fortunate to be exposed to extremely smart and talented golf professionals, as well as a lot of very, very, very smart coaches from other sports and other walks of life. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I mean, I have 2 high school coaches that are in their respective sports National Hall of Fame.
Wow.
And then I was able to work as a very young professional. I was able to work for 2 professionals that are now in the Connecticut Golf Hall of Fame. So I was very fortunate to be in those positions and to be able to learn from them. So I would say my wrestling coach was probably one of my biggest influences in how I coach my golfers. It's just a lot different arena, a lot different of level of intensity, but
right.
you're still working with a lot of the same principles. But also the golf, I've been a professional since I was 19. So, I mean, it's, I've just been able to have exposure to a lot of great minds. It's been fabulous.
And it's interesting that what I take away from that is it wasn't just all about golf. There were other influencers that were not necessarily in the golf profession that influenced your career to this point, and that's extremely important. We often talk about juniors. Obviously we love when juniors want to come into the game, but we also want them to be active in other sports for a number of reasons. To become a more well-rounded athlete, of course, but to be exposed to other things, because if it's golf all the time, it can be very easy for them to get burned out and to lose interest because they're not seeing and being exposed to other things. And it doesn't even have to be other sports. It can be other, something, walking on a trail or hiking, whatever case, out boating, fishing, whatever the case, whatever their passions might be. So I like the fact that some of your earlier influences were not just golf professionals, but other professionals and maybe just mentors that you look up to and respected in how they handled themselves in their everyday life that somehow influenced you and made you the person that you are today. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And it's funny because, wrestling and golf are so far apart, but I have a better understanding of cause and effect in my golf coaching because of my early background in wrestling. It's very strange. It's very relatable. They're all one's extremely physical and the other one is definitely not. But it's cause and effect.
Yeah,
and that's the basis of it.
Yeah, and they're very, as you said, very polar different too. I mean, they're at the opposite spectrum. I mean, one's a physical sport, and although I know golf, some might argue say it is physical to a point. There are physical requirements, of course, but you're not making physical contact, or at least you shouldn't be out of the golf course unless unless you're arguing with someone in your foursome. But yeah, hopefully not. So then let's again sort of take this to the next step and just say, how is your teaching, do you think, then as a result of early influences and maybe just your own experiences, how has your teaching evolved thus far over your career? Where do you see it in the beginning, and how has it evolved and taken shape to where we are today?
It's evolved quite seriously. I mean, from, being one of my mentors early on, saw a lot of potential in me and verbalized that to me, but he said something that has stuck with me. He said that you don't know what you don't know yet. And I think about that a lot. And from an early age, you're sitting there at 19 years old and you're teaching an adult, and you're changing the outcome. You're helping. But as an older professional now, I say, okay, I definitely wouldn't offer that as a solution now.
Right.
But I would say it's really, I've always been a person that's focused more on the forward swing from the transition through the ball. I will say that. Mm. But it's really gone from being, as a young professional, having information passed down, through the years, and believing that the swing started from the top down, whereas I completely and wholeheartedly believe now that the swing starts from the ground up. Whether anytime you're putting speed on the club in general, that would be the biggest difference, technique-wise. And back then, I felt like I was talking way too much. Now this is a different circumstance if we're talking a lot on the podcast right now, but during my sessions, I'm listening a lot more than I'm talking.
Yeah, and that's a great point. That's a great point, Peter, because that's really the way it should be. We were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and I think one of the mistakes, myself included, I'll be the first to admit to it, earlier on in my life, when you're young, let me just back it up a little bit. You said you talked about when you were 19. When I think back to when I was 19, 20 years old, and I think it's probably more this way for boys than it is for girls. But there's a certain cockiness, there's a certain arrogance. You think it's like you say, you know what you know, and you don't what you don't. And what's interesting, when you're at that age, you're very eager to get out and sort of strike out in the world and make your own way. So you don't really have a lot of experience, and you just sort of wing it a lot of times. And you can be very well trained and you can receive some of the best education, but there's still an inherent ability, if you will, from somebody that age, because you don't have a lot of experience yet, and I'm talking obviously life experiences, that it's very difficult for you, as you pointed out, you were teaching people that were older than you, that maybe at times might have looked at you and thought, what's this kid trying to tell me? I know all that, and you know what I mean? Like there's that sort of difference in age. But now that you're older and you've had some experiences along the way,
I still get that.
And you sure. Yeah, I mean, I do too. Listen, and I'm going to be mid-50s next year, but
no,
you know what I mean? There's a certain...
Ted, you bring up a great point, and we've talked about this before on the podcast. About we had the episode where we talked about the over 50 golfer, and my point was the fact that their past experiences were such a strength of theirs. We're talking about their physical limitations, all of this stuff, and we discussed that. And, just to elaborate on your point you're making right now, you're exactly right. Keep going. Sorry.
Well, I had, just to bring this full circle, I had a gentleman I worked with years ago, not in the golf industry, but in a different industry. And he said to me, and I was in my 20s at the time, and I was always a pretty pretty on the ball guy, but I had that sort of cocky, arrogant a little bit too, like the rest of us. And he said to me, he said, "I'm going to tell you something, Ted." He said, and he was probably close to 60 at the time. He said, "People will not take you serious until you get at least into your mid to late 30s, maybe even early 40s. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't listen to you, but because they don't feel, or they, I guess, subconsciously know that you haven't had a lot of life experiences yet. So what you're telling them is what you've learned from somebody else, not through your own experiences, whether it be a textbook that's been written or somebody else that's instilled their wisdom." And that doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It just means you haven't really gained enough life experience yet that some people may be apprehensive when you tell them something. Whereas if you say, "Well, I did this," or "I used to do that," it gives them a little bit easier to understand. Okay, yeah, this guy's experienced that too, or he hit some bad shots over time too, and here's what he's done to overcome that. So now I'm going to take him a little bit more serious. And I think this is something, to go to your point about listening more now, is something that we all need to do, regardless of what profession. Whether you're in the golf profession or you're in another profession, you need to listen more to your students, to their concerns, what they have to say, and what's of interest to them. It doesn't matter what's of interest to you. It's what's of interest to them. Where do they want to improve? What's important to them? Because if you try to teach them something that's away from what they're telling you, they're going to get very frustrated. They're going to recognize very early on that you're not listening to them, and they're going to just shut down. And then you have, trying to get through that wall is like chiseling through concrete. It's not an easy task.
And then, Ted, on that same point, you have to listen in order to understand. I see and talk to a lot of professionals that are willing to listen, but they're strictly listening to respond. They're looking to jump on the first point where they see they can make a connection. They're jumping. They're jumping on the first, and then. Right. But let people talk. Let people go. Let people find. And a lot of times, especially now, they're going to reveal their own contextual understanding of what they're attempting to execute on their own. They're going to discover this. This is just what I've seen. They're going to lead themselves. And then as you're listening, if you feel like they're getting to a constructive point, you can guide them towards where they're going. And they don't even know they're going there. And a lot of times they'll say to me, it was like, "You really haven't talked a whole lot." I was like, "But look where your ball's going."
Yes.
And they have more context at that point, whatever they're relating to, And I always say to people afterward, I said, "This is going to be a lasting change for you because you're resourcing something that you have been doing for as long or longer that has nothing to do with golf, whether it's sewing, baseball, whatever it is. There, you have to have an item that you can relate to that you've been doing the same amount of time or longer in order to really change the outcome of whatever they're doing. That's where they end up guiding. They end up really searching and discovering that from themselves, strictly because they're not having to listen to me talk.
Right.
It's pretty amazing.
Let me just add this very quickly, and then I've got another question I want to ask you.
Sure.
One of the things that I think sometimes can be detrimental to the golf industry, and particularly golf instruction, is we have to remember that everybody, and I mean everybody, doesn't matter whether they've ever played golf or not, everybody has a natural body rhythm and a natural swing. One of the things that we have to be careful of in this industry is that what we say or what we relay to our students doesn't get in the way of that natural motion. And if you think about it, from childhood, when we swing a stick, it's a very free-flowing motion for the most part. I mean, obviously there's some coordination issues when you're toddlers, but when you get a little bit older, most people can swing a stick or swing an object. But what ultimately happens is when somebody comes in and says, well, no, you need to do it like this and you do that, suddenly they get out of their natural rhythm. And this is something that I've seen, and this is, again, because I think that a lot of times, you know, and I'm not saying all teachers do this, but sometimes in the industry we get in our own way. We try to instill what we believe this particular student should or shouldn't do, and a lot of times it's maybe not going to jive with the natural rhythm or body motions that particular student has. We try to, and I've said this before on the show, try to put them all into the same box. And this is something that I've seen in the golf industry for many, many years with different swing theories, and there's nothing wrong with that, but putting everybody in the same box, it can be, in my opinion, I think it can be very damaging, and a lot of times that can also add to the frustration of the students. Peter, I want to ask you this question, and this is a question I've never really put in this context, but I thought it was an interesting one. If you were in front of a group, doesn't matter how big it was, who never played golf before, how would you describe the experience to them?
Never played golf before. Never been on a golf course before.
They've never played golf before. I mean, this is like fresh clay in your hands. How would you describe the experience to them?
Well, I did that. I've done that for the past 2 semesters at Williams College, just teaching the phys ed golf class, and it's amazing. I mean, in nature, I would say it's a really naturally organic experience. It really is. I mean, and I say that to them in the beginning, and then they get, as we progress through the class and they're spending more time on the golf course, they agree with that. And they appreciate, if they're not appreciating the golf aspect, they're appreciating the nature and the scenery. And they see animals, and they're walking through, a golf course that's extremely well manicured, and they can't believe the grass. They think it's fake. I mean, they really do. They really thought the putting surface was fake because it was grass that they had never seen before, and it's amazing just to watch them discover their surroundings, and then the idea of making contact. They're wrapping their head around the idea of making contact with the golf ball. However they're gripping it. The mechanics of it are insignificant. And when they make contact for the first time, whether it's to whatever quality it may be, there's the look on their face of just joy, like they just done something that they never thought they can do. And it's fun. It's really, really fun to watch and see.
Yeah, and I think something else too, sorry, go ahead, please, finish your thought.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
What I was going to say or add to, Peter, is this. I've always equated golf and the comparisons to life. And I actually did this recently. In fact, I think it was last week when I had my very special guest, Eddie Merens, on the show. And of course, Eddie, is a top professional. He's been around the game for, years just racked them up. I mean, he's 85 years young, and he's just, been around some of the best players in the world. And, I said to him that really I equate golf to life in so many ways, because if you think about it, in life we get faced on a daily basis with a variety of different challenges. Some can be very minor, some can be very major, and can be even have tragic consequences. And we have to learn how to navigate those different obstacles in our life in order to continue living. And I've found a way to equate that on the golf course. And obviously, as a quick example, when you're out there and you're stepping up in the first tee, as you look down the fairway, you see some of the different obstacles. It might be maybe some fairway bunkers. It might be water up the left or right side, maybe out of bounds. So there are obstacles. And really, the better golfer is able to navigate those obstacles to his or her ability in the fewest strokes possible. And that's really the object of golf, is to get around the golf course for 18 holes or whatever it is you're playing, but 18 holes in the fewest strokes possible. And what golf has done is thrown up a few roadblocks. We're going to put some bunkers here. We're going to put some water here. We're going to put a few hazards over here. And the better player will learn how to navigate those obstacles or overcome those obstacles when need be. In the instance if they get into a hazard or they fall, their ball falls into the water with a bad tee shot or errant shot. So what you learn on the golf course and how you handle those challenges are very similar to how you handle the different obstacles that you deal with in life. So when I'm working with somebody that's brand new, is I say to them, what you're going to do is you're going to go out there. First and foremost, I want you to have fun, but you're going to be challenged. And I want to see how you're going to handle those challenges when you get out in the golf course. It doesn't matter how well they hit the ball. It doesn't matter whether they, as you said, whether they got the perfect grip. I want to see how they're going to handle themselves out on the golf course. Are they going to get scared? Are they going to get intimidated? Or are they going to meet and try to the best of their ability to overcome those challenges? And once I see that, then that's going to tell me what I truly need to work on. Because a lot of times, as I said earlier, they may have some good skills already, but it may be how they play the game is really where their downfall is. So to answer that question that I asked you is I want them to have an experience when they're out in the golf course. And then I want to equip them with the tools necessary to not only have fun, but to handle those challenges and obstacles while they're out there. And that's really, in my opinion, what I think golf instruction is equipping them with the tools and the knowledge on how to overcome some of those obstacles. Agree, disagree, or do you want to add to that?
No, I completely agree. There's that comparison it's a great comparison you're drawing, that golf is very comparable to life, and if what you can be as an adult, the best thing you can do is be best equipped to handle whatever comes your way, and it's very, very similar to golf. I agree with you completely.
Yeah, and this is what I think when people put that into perspective, because they don't really think about it. They think, well, I got to hit my tee shot, and they understand that the trouble and the obstacles are out there, but they don't really think about it. They're too busy focusing on their swing, making sure they're getting in the right position, or making sure they're making perfect contact. So they've got a lot of different things on there, but they're not really focusing on the challenges or the actual task that's on hand. They've got too many other things buzzing around in their head, and this would get the average golfer, I think, in a lot of trouble. The pros go up there. They know what obstacles are out there. They know what they need to do. They've got a goal in mind. It's a short-term goal wrapped around other goals that are going to ultimately end up, hopefully, winning the golf tournament. And that's essentially what they do. And this is the same thing that the different hurdles that we experience in life. And I think that, if you can navigate those challenges out in the golf course, then you're apt to have an easier time handling those different obstacles and challenges that you might be facing in everyday life. So that's something for folks to think about. And I want to obviously move on because we're going to be running out of time here soon, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more.
Yeah,
just a quick update, folks. Obviously, just a quick update, folks. I just received a text from John Hughes, our other special guest on the Coach's Corner panel, and as we suspected, he was running late with the lesson and sends his apologies. So not to worry, John, Peter, and I are handling the fort quite well, and we're happy to carry the load tonight, and we'll get you next time. But let me ask you this. Have you ever had a wow moment in your career? Has there ever been a moment that you went, wow, I mean, that was fantastic? Or, just,
I was going to say, on what
wow.
end? Because there's...
Give us one. Obviously, we don't have a lot of time. But...
No, I mean, yeah.
Right.
It's been, fortunately there's been there's been quite a few positive wow moments, but I think it's because I just so empathetic as to exactly how difficult this can be to do, just not swinging the golf club, but playing golf itself. I would say the most recent is that we have one of our members who's just a fantastic person. He's so much fun. A relatively new golfer, but, and I would say a year ago he was shooting in the 90s, and I played golf with him for the first time in a while, and he was just playing so well. And he was moving well. He was hitting shots that he just didn't have before. And I just said, wow. I really did say, wow. I said, wow, you really have gotten I just told him, you've improved dramatically, and it's really nice to see. Because he's just a nice person.
Right.
And everybody says that. To the point where last week he broke 80. He shot 79 when, which is about almost more than a 20-stroke improvement over last year. And
wow.
We were together last night, and he got, unofficially voted, the most improved of his group of friends, and it's just fun. It's nice to see because he's really. And I asked him, just we're walking together, and I asked him what he contributed to that kind of improvement. He says, well, I feel more comfortable on the golf course. He feels more like he just has a better sense of what he can do and what he can't do, and I thought that was extremely strong and insightful of him. It was great, and that's just most recently that was the wow that just happened this past week. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and what a great story. Peter, what's interesting about that is that's really, in my opinion, the goal that all golfers should seek is get to a point in your game where you're confident and you're comfortable. And that doesn't mean you're hitting everything perfect out there, because nobody does. We know that the realistic side of golf is nobody hits perfect shots all the time. But when you get to a comfort level with your game, that you're confident that when you go out there, you're going to be able to bring your very best each and every time. And even when you don't, it's not going to get you down. You're not going to be throwing your clubs or getting upset or snapping at your spouse when you get home. You're going to be able to say, okay, today wasn't my best round, but somehow, way, shape, or form, I'm going to learn from this experience. And when I go out next Tuesday or next weekend and play with the group again, I'm going to have something that I can draw on and another experience that I can draw on. And that's ultimately, in my opinion, what makes a better golfer. You can sit and beat balls from now until the end of time. That doesn't necessarily going to make you a better golfer. It's how you handle the different experiences and challenges, and then come to terms with those challenges that, in my opinion, I think makes you a better golfer. And obviously your friend there has come to that realization as well. And kudos to him. That's a big wow. Yeah, that's a big wow to come from, barely breaking 90 to then breaking 80.
Barely breaking 100. Breaking 100.
Breaking 100.
Just amazing. Amazing stuff. It was great. It was good fun. Good fun.
That's fantastic. All right, Peter, let me ask you this last question, and if you haven't had one yet, I've got a sort of fallback question, but your first ever, or maybe only, hole-in-one or best round played. If you didn't have a hole-in-one, walk us through that a little bit. If you've had a hole-in-one, tell us about your first hole-in-one. Obviously, I'm sure an exciting moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us sort of going in your mind and maybe a little bit about it.
So I'm a graduate of Methodist University, so we have our members club golf course on campus. We're really fortunate. That's where I had my first hole-in-one. It was during the second week of my first year in school. I was the first person to ever get a hole-in-one on that hole, ever. And it was a 218-yard uphill par 3 with a green that had about a 6 to 7% slope. right to left. And I hit a 2-iron up there and made it. And the week after that, I lipped out on the 4th hole for a double eagle, and I think if I made that double eagle, I wouldn't be playing golf anymore. So I was just cashing my chips at that point. But it was a blind shot. It's straight up, not straight uphill, but it's pretty, good 20 feet uphill. So you don't see it go in. But you get up there, and it was great. I hit a max fly revolution. I know. That. that's how long ago it was.
Yes, yeah, that is long ago, Peter. I had not as eventful of a first hole in one, and it was a par 3. It was actually very few courses at that time had this, but it was actually hole number 18, which was a par 3 in this particular course. They now have another 27 holes, but it was at Hidden Lake Golf and Country Club in Burlington, Ontario, and up in Canada, of course, where I'm originally from. Mm-hmm. And hole number 18, and I was having an okay round. And it was, I think it was 194 it was playing to that day. It actually can play longer, but I think it was playing to about 194. And I actually hit a 4-iron. I had a little bit of a breeze behind me. But what was interesting about it was in behind the green is the parking lot. Of course, the driveway into the golf facility runs along the right-hand side. And then, of course, you got the parking lot and then the clubhouse to the right. And when I hit it, there was a large group of trees in behind. So I kind of lost the ball for a moment, and I had visions because I really stepped on it, and I thought, this thing's gone. And I was just praying that it was going to hit the trees, because there were a lot of nice-looking cars parked in that parking lot, and they pretty much backed right up almost onto that hole. And I was just waiting for the shattering glass. And my playing partner, who was a very good friend of mine, David, at the time, he said, I think that went in. I said, no. I said, that's gone, David. I said, it's in the parking lot. Well, sure enough, we got up there. Not an exciting hole, not an exciting, strategy, if you will, but it was my first hole in one, and I was thankful for 2 reasons. Obviously, the hole in one, and thankfully, I didn't shatter anybody's windshield in the parking lot and behind. And actually, funny enough,
you're
the following
excited because
summer,
you didn't have to buy a new windshield for a Porsche. Yeah, and I was, I was early 20s at the time, and I actually, funny enough, I worked at that golf course the following summer, and I made a suggestion that they alter the parking lot a little bit. I said because it makes it very intimidating for people that are playing 18, and sure enough, they did. They actually took out that row of cars and moved it to a different area. But it was very interesting, and that was my very first one, and it was just an exciting. Yeah, and it just had so many. I mean, it could have gone bad so many ways. If I had not hitting a solid shot, obviously I would have come up short, or if I had hit a little bit too much fade, or in those days I called it a slice. I could have been getting the cars coming up and down the drive. So it had many opportunities of having a hazardous outcome. But fortunately for me, it was a hole in one in my first one, and I've had 2 in my career. But nonetheless, they were fun. Peter, as always, I had a great time, and I enjoy you coming on Coach's Corner. And I'm sorry that John wasn't able to join us, but them the breaks, as they say. Fun.
Yeah, John's a good guy, and he's been on the show many, many times, not only as a guest, but also on the Coach's Corner panel. He's been pretty regular. And just to update everybody, of course, I'm going to be sending out to all of the guys and the gals that have been on the Coach's Corner panel. The 2018 schedule is going to be coming out here. I'm hoping to get it out before Thanksgiving, everybody a chance to think about what they want to do. But we're gearing up for a new season taking place in 2018. So for those of you that have been on the panel, and I hope you'll come back on, and for those of you that may be tuning into the show tonight, some of you pros that have never been on the Coach's Corner panel, by all means, you want to step up and join. We're going to have a lot of fun. Got some great things going to be happening next year. So, Peter, I hope I can count on you coming back next year as well.
Absolutely.
We'll have a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter, just in some closing moments here of the Coach's Corner panel, just let the folks know if they want to reach out to you and maybe let you help them with their game, or maybe just maybe might have some questions for you. Let the folks know how they can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Always feel free to reach out to me, especially on social media. I'm on Facebook under my name. I have a fan page as well. It's Peter Egazarian, PGA and TPI Performance Coach. I am most prevalent on Instagram. My handle is @DailyGolfCoach, and also on Twitter @DailyGolfPro. Please feel free to reach out. Send me a DM. Any questions I can answer for you, I'm happy to. I also have a website that's gogolfcoach.com. And, going into the off season here in the Northeast, I'm teaching 10 months a year. So I take off November and April for the most part, spend my family, but I do have the facility in North Adams, Massachusetts, which is right in that upper northwest corner, and also a facility outside Springfield, which a lot of people from Connecticut, eastern part of Massachusetts, and Vermont actually really like that facility because it's so close to the Route 90 or the Mass Turnpike, and also Route 91, which really runs right down the center part of New England. So however I can help, let me know, please. And, I'm always happy to answer questions I'm really going to be putting out programs for 2018 at Traconic here shortly. Really one of the most popular programs this year was I just call it the daily program. There was quite a few people that traveled from outside the area, had a morning of instruction, bought you lunch, chat together, went and had an 18-hole playing lesson. That's something that's definitely going to be available again. So if you're obviously from outside of the area, if you're listening, that's a very good option. And Williamstown itself is a very cool little town, and a lot of very fun things to do, and a lot of art and museums as well, if that's your thing.
Perfect. Well, Peter, as always, thank you very much for coming on the Coach's Corner panel tonight, and a little bit different panel than what we normally have here, but always got to mix it up every once in a while, right? And I had fun.
It's you and I, Ted.
Having
it's
you
great.
on the show.
It's perfect.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I'll give my good friend John a ribbing a little bit later. No, I'm only kidding. I love having John on the show, and I know these things happen, and I appreciate you giving of your time.
Mm-hmm. Happy to.
All the time on the panel discussion. So have a great weekend, and in case I don't talk with you before, happy Thanksgiving, and I will see you next time on the Coach's Corner panel.
Yeah, you as well, Ted. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. All right, that was my very special guest, Peter Egazarian, of course, on the Coach's Corner panel. And all kidding aside, my good friend John Hughes, PGA Master Professional out of Orlando, unfortunately wasn't able to make it this evening, and sends his apologies. So we'll get him next time, but not to worry. I'm always happy to have him on the show. And I know, as I've said so many times here on Golf Talk Live, that these things happen. Everybody's working hard. Everybody's got things that they need to do, so I don't have an issue with that. But I'm very excited about my very special guest this evening. You all, I'm sure, will know him once I bring him on here. His name is Peter Kessler. Of course, he's a golf announcer known as The Voice, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then I'm going to bring him on because I see he's ready. Peter Kessler was the voice of HBO Sports from 1990 through 95. Narrating Peabody, Ace, and Emmy Award-winning documentaries, including When It Was a Game, When It Was a Game 2, the boxing trilogy In This Corner, and The Sweet Science. He was the premier talent at Golf Channel from 1995 through to 2002, and hosted, wrote, and produced over 1,300 live one-hour episodes on 4 different shows, Golf Talk Live, Academy Live, Viewers Forum, and, of course, Masters Highlights. An active figure in the golf industry, Peter has been featured in multiple golf publications around the world, including cover stories in Golf World and GolfWeek. His expertise and historical acumen was the subject of a 10-page profile and interview in Golf Digest. Additionally, Peter has produced programs for Callaway Golf, Adams Golf, Gary Player Golf, and, of course, Bobby Jones Golf. The first voice on the PGA Tour Network, Peter also wrote and hosted a daily show from 2005 through 2015. His podcast, Reading the Break, of course, has been on iTunes, was rated the #1 golf podcast for 2014 and 2015, and is continually sought after for his narrating work. Peter has provided voiceover talent for American Express, the NBA, the USTA, and, of course, the Boys and Girls Club of America. And we're going to talk about some of those things and, of course, his podcast and many, many other great things as we continue the conversation. But let me welcome my very special guest, Mr. Peter Kessler.
Oh, I am
Good evening,
absolutely
Peter.
delighted. I am delighted to be with you, and I'll tell you, when you told me that one of your guests was unable to make it, it reminded me of something that Arnold Palmer once said to me. He and I had just played golf at Bay Hill, and he didn't feel good, and he was supposed to be the guest speaker at a dinner, but he's only supposed to be one of 3 or 4. And I said, look, if you feel this bad, don't go. And he said, no, when you make a commitment, you show up no matter how you feel, no matter what's going on.
Well said. Words to live by. It happens, and as I'm sure you know, Peter, from doing all that you do, sometimes these things happen. And
of course.
I've known John. Yeah, I've known John for a number of years. He's a great golf professional, and he texted me a few moments before we went live and said that he was tied up with a student. So I understand that, and these guys are giving of their time. So Peter and I, my previous guest, we held the fort, as they say. Peter, I want to say before we get into our discussion.
I didn't realize you'd mentioned the guy's name. I apologize.
No. Yeah, no, I did. Peter, I want to say this before we start our conversation tonight. I have been obviously a huge fan, as many have for years. I remember your earlier days, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment, from the Golf Channel. And one of the things that I guess I loved about watching as I mentioned, you did 4 shows on the Golf Channel. One of the things that I really enjoyed, particularly about your time with them, was the atmosphere that you created. As an example, you had a great backdrop, if you will. You had the fireplace and, some comfortable chairs, and you felt like you were in somebody's living room, around the fireplace, a fireside chat, if you will. And it was a very comfortable feeling, much unlike many of the platforms that we see today with some of the sports centers and so forth going on. And it really impressed me how you made everybody feel like they were sitting right there with you. So I want to ask you this. Was that part of your plan, or was that something that the Golf Channel decided to do from the get-go?
Well, it's funny you should ask that just the way that you did, because when the Golf Channel went on the air on January 17th, 1995, the first show that we did was live, and it was with me and Arnold Palmer. And in October, most of the people in October of 94 had now arrived at the Golf Channel that were going to be there for the launch in January of 95. And in my particular case, when I was hired to host a show on Mondays to talk to the greatest players in the world, and on Tuesdays and Wednesdays to talk to the greatest teachers in the world. I also did some sideline reporting as a walking reporter for the Nike Tour events in my very few months after the channel launched in 95. Then they pulled me inside to do more studio work. But what happened was they were so busy building the sets and getting things ready and getting the control room ready and getting all the electronic equipment in and the robotic cameras and people to work the robotic cameras that I was absolutely left 100% alone to figure out how I was going to do these shows. And when the time came to do the very first show, nobody in the building knew what I was going to do. I had spent 30 years reading golf history several nights a week from the time I was 13 years old until the Golf Channel went on the air. And so I had a very strong knowledge base. I had also acted in college and in high school. I did community theater. I did a lot of public speaking. I was comfortable in front of people. Stars
Right.
never intimidated me. And so what I did was, in a normal week, I would put a pad down on Tuesday morning, and by the next Monday morning, when the show was going to be on, the chat show with the great players, I would have probably 100 questions on this yellow pad. And I would cull them down to 20 questions on the Monday morning. And I would do all of this at home, and I would call into the studio, and I would tell my producer, Lee Siegel, okay, in the first segment I'm going to do this, so could you have this piece of film ready? Could you prepare this graphic? Could you do this for me to get it set up so that when I get to this point, I have what I need from you? And I knew my subject so well and did so much research during the week to get ready for the show that not only was it easy for me to come up with a list of great questions, but I knew exactly what the answers were going to be. Now, because I knew exactly what the answers were going to be, I was able to, in my head, time out the show. So my idea was to present each 1-hour show as a 1-hour play. I knew what I was going to say. I knew what the guest was going to say. I was pretty sure I knew what my follow-up was going to be. So I always culled it down to 20 questions. I wrote it on a legal pad. I put it on the inside pocket of my sport coat. And actually only one time in 1,300 shows did I ever pull out the list to look at it, because I had memorized it. I actually had a photographic memory and could see pages in books. If you asked me a question about history, I could actually see the page, and I could see if there was a smudge mark on the page in my mind's eye. So my idea was, it's a 1-hour play. I know my lines. I know what the other guy's lines are. So in my head, I timed it out, and I can't recall a single occasion in 1,300 shows where I didn't get in my 20 questions and it didn't go exactly as I had planned, except for 2 shows where I feel I made mistakes in how I handled the shows. But in terms of the timing and the atmosphere, that was something I dreamt up myself. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I had done a lot of theater. I was a very big movie buff. When I was a young boy, Yankee Doodle Dandy with James Cagney as George M. Cohan, the man who invented song and dance on Broadway, was a very big influence to me. And so I had an acute awareness from a theatrical point of view what these things ought to be. And so that's how I was able to create the atmosphere, because I was never guessing and I was never wondering, and I was literally performing this 1-hour show that we did without rehearsal.
Yeah, and they were fabulous, and I give you obviously a lot of credit for obviously having tremendous preparation, and it makes a lot of sense now hearing what went behind it. And I guess, Peter, one of the things that always struck me that was interesting about it was the atmosphere that you did create. That's why I enjoyed it. Obviously we knew a lot of the answers, when we talked about, Nicklaus's Masters win in '86 and how historical that became some years later on to this day. But it was just the way that the guests were comfortable, the audience, meaning us, was comfortable. You just had a way of sort of putting things together that just made it that way. And I think that's why I enjoyed so much watching, and I've always been a big follower of you for many, many years. And I thank you for that. And that's part of it. Go ahead.
The show's called on the 3, 4, or 5 things that I'm really, really good at. I also had some gifts that I just allowed to occur, and it called on none of the 1,000 things that I'm absolutely horrible at. So it was an incredibly perfect fit for what my strengths turned out to be and what gifts I ended up having, like the gift of making you feel like you were in the living room. There's no way to make you do that. It was just a gift of mine that I was able to create that kind of environment.
Yeah, and you did it incredibly well, because that's exactly how I felt, and I know many others that used to watch during that time felt. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say that's exactly how you feel. Like you felt like you were just right there in the room with you and whatever special guest. And we're going to talk about some of those guests in just a moment. But I want to ask you a question I ask a lot of guests that come on here, just to give the audience a little bit of an understanding of how you sort of got involved in golf in general. So you've obviously had a very long and very interesting career that still continues to this day. What drew you to the game as somebody obviously that has been at the Golf Channel, but also the game itself? What was about the game that you enjoyed the most, and how did you sort of become involved?
When I was 8 or 9 years old and living in New Jersey, my parents belonged to a local club. And my mother used to take me and my sister and my 2 younger brothers, I'm the oldest, to the swimming pool, and my dad would play golf with his brother every Saturday and Sunday. And one day when I was 8 or 9, I wandered away from the pool, and I found myself on what was the 10th tee of the golf course. And just at that moment, my father and his brother, my uncle, and their other 2 players in the group came to the 10th tee, so I watched. And my father hit what I later learned to be a howling slice, and then his brother, my uncle, made a hole-in-one. So the second shot that I ever saw hit in golf was a hole-in-one. And, of course, that fascinated me. And what happened was, at that time there was no pro junior programs or anything like that, and I didn't know anybody else my age who was interested in golf. And so really the only time I got to play golf as a kid was when we would go up for 4th of July or Memorial Day or Labor Day and for dinner, and I would leave the table, and I would go down to the bag room, and I would take a driver and some clubs out of somebody's bag. I had no idea whose bag it was. And I would play up to the first hole and back to the first tee, and up to the first hole and back to the first tee. And so my early love of golf became such that I played it at the end of the day, and I was by myself. And even now, 55 years later, I still enjoy going out all by myself at 5:30 and playing 9 holes with nobody else around, and don't bring my phone in the cart. And I've always loved to play at that time of day. So I fell in love with the game at that particular moment, and I didn't really get a chance to play much until my family moved to California in 1966 when I was 14 years old. And again, my dad joined a club, and there were a lot of kids my age who played, 2 of whom are still my closest friends that I speak to all the time, actually 3. The thing that spurred my deeper interest in the game was when I was 13 years old, somebody gave me a copy of Bobby Jones's autobiography that he wrote when he was 24 in 1926. Now, at that time, he had not yet won the Grand Slam. That would be 4 years later. But in 1926, he became the first person to win the U.S. Open and the Open Championship in the course of the same season. And at the end of that year, he wrote the book. And he made 300 private copies that he would really just give to friends and family at Christmas time. So when I read this book, I just fell in love with Bobby Jones, and I fell in love with golf history, and I fell in love with his evocation of time and place, and I understood what he was talking about when he discussed the feelings that he had when he played and the feelings that he had when he would mishit a shot, and how sometimes it was difficult to hold on to the golf club after a swing if his emotions got too strong and he got too angry internally that holding a club was the last thing he wanted to do. And somehow the fact that it seared his soul really touched me. So when I finished down the fairway, I started to go and get golf books. And I had my mom and dad get me Golf Digest and Golf World and Golf Magazine, which were all available at the time. We got a subscription. And I went to libraries and I went to bookstores and I started to build up a collection. And I was otherwise a fairly normal teenager, but I read golf history voraciously. I read it several nights a week. I read it for several hours. I read the same books over and over. I expanded my collection. And I continued to read golf history from the time I was 13 until I was 42 when we first went on the air with the Golf Channel. So I had a 30-year PhD program in golf history, and I probably was one of the top 5 most knowledgeable golf historians, if you will, at that point in time, with ever having thought about anything like that. But when the Golf Channel opportunity presented itself, which maybe we'll talk about how that came about, I was so prepared in terms of knowing the history of the game and its championships and its players and how the game probably started and how putting began and the history of golf balls and golf equipment and great players themselves. So I had this huge wealth of knowledge, which was accompanied by a really deep love for playing the game. I just loved to play golf, and I played as often as I could, and I had a job before I joined the Golf Channel for many years that allowed me to join a local club where I lived in New York at that particular time from 1981, say, through 1994 when I moved to Orlando for the Golf Channel's opening. And so I loved to play. I loved to hit balls. Nothing gave me more pleasure than to go to the range and hit balls just for the longest periods of time. I loved hitting wedges more than any other club. I found that I wouldn't wear myself out if I hit wedges. I found out that hitting wedges was a good key to scoring. So my love of the history of the game combined with my love of playing the game was a pretty ideal combination for being able to take the information that I had absorbed as a historian and as somebody who was a player, not particularly a good player, but a player, you know, who really cared deeply about the game in every way. So those things came together, you know, to form my sensibility about the game. So I had a deep love for all things golf.
Wow. You know, it's interesting. I think probably one of the only other people that I know that I would add into that would be Ben Crenshaw. You know, Ben Crenshaw talks about and I don't know to what level, but I've heard him talk over the years about his love of the history of the game as well. And I remember there was an interview, in fact, it was probably on the Golf Channel some years ago from his home, and he walked into his library, if you will, and had just about every book you could imagine. And he, I think, also immersed himself in the history of the game. It was very important. It was a very important part of his golfing career, not just playing out on the PGA Tour and of course, in the majors, but also studying and understanding the history of the game itself. And again, I don't know to what level he would be classified as a historian, but he did have a love for the history of the game as well. And I'm sure you probably would know.
Yes, he's a very knowledgeable historian, and we occasionally will ask each other a question through email, and you're not allowed to look anything up. You must just answer the question. And so the last question I asked him was, what were the final 2 practice round scores that Francis Ouimet had in 1913 before he won the U.S. Open in a playoff by shooting 72 in the playoff and beating the 2 guys who were acknowledged to be the 2 best players in the world, Ted Ray and Harry Vardon. And immediately he said, a pair of 88s. And then he wrote, and that was the answer. He shot 88 in his last 2 practice rounds and then won the U.S. Open. So he wrote back and said, okay, in what order did the sand wedge and pitching wedge come into play? And I said the sand wedge actually came first in 1932, and then the pitching wedge was developed, because through 1931, the most lofted club in a player's bag was a 9-iron. So these guys like Bobby Jones, when he won at Winged Foot in 1929 with his gaping, awning bunkers, had to play those shots, even though he had very few of them to play from the sand. He had to play them with a 9-iron. And Winged Foot today is really the same course as it was in 1929. And then Jones won in a playoff that was at 36 holes, and he won by 23 shots, shooting 72-69 with no more lofted club than a 9-iron. So we've had some back and forth. The last time I saw Ben, we had time to play 3 holes, and he hit a terrible drive, a terrible second shot, and a terrible chip, and made a 25-footer. On the second hole, he hit a terrible drive, a terrible second shot, a terrible chip, and made a 25-footer. And then he did the same thing on the third hole. So he made 3 25-footers for par. And there's something about the way that Ben Crenshaw's ball rolls on a green when you're with him in person, that it seems to hug the green and be impervious to the bumps and imperfections. And then the other thing is, you're absolutely certain that the ball's not going to get to the hole. And not only does it get to the hole, but if the hole was just a circle and not a hole, his ball would have stopped in the center of the circle.
Wow, that's amazing. You know, I've always admired, his putting prowess for years. I mean, he's certainly, in my opinion, if not the best, certainly in the top 2 all-time of putters. It's just incredible. Since you very generously handed me a soft serve about the Golf Channel, I'm going to reciprocate by obviously asking the obvious question. You amassed a great amount of knowledge about the game and its history and so forth, and then at some point the opportunity to be a part of the Golf Channel with its inception. Tell us about how that happened, and was that something that you were interested in at the time, or was it just more happenstance? What was the procedure, if you will, on becoming part of the Golf Channel?
My dad died very early. I was 20 and he was 50, and I never got to know him very well, and we never had a lot of deep conversations. My parents had split up. He traveled a lot. I didn't know him well. I loved him. He was the manager of my Little League team. We played golf, maybe 10 or 15 times in total. He wasn't a very good player. He had been injured in the World War II at Iwo Jima. He was a Marine. And I never got any sort of information from him or direction from him, or even telling me how to think about what I should do with myself. And one of the things that happened was that I met a fellow who became close to my family, and he was an attorney, and he got me a job in London working for N.M. Rothschild and Sons, the very famous investment bank of the very famous European family. And I didn't really like the job, but we lived in London, which was great, and traveled for a couple of years, and then I came back to New York to open up an office for them. And then on my 35th birthday, after I had then bounced around a little bit in the securities industry, I woke up on my 35th birthday and said, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't like it. And people had said things about my voice. So I thought, maybe I'll try to do something with my voice. So I went to a voiceover class on a Monday night that ran from 6 to 10 in downtown New York City. And there were 9 actresses and me. And I was so enthralled at looking at these actresses, I would look at one and say, okay, I would really like to be with her for a week. I'd like to be with her for a month. I think I would marry that one, that I was paying no attention whatsoever. But after about 20 minutes, I realized exactly where they were going with this class, and I never went back again. And I went home and started to read advertisements from magazines allowed into a tape recorder, women's magazines, men's magazines, advertisements of any kind, and just started to practice at home a little bit. And a friend of mine worked at HBO Sports, and I told him I was going to try to break into the business of doing commercials. And he said, I know a couple of guys who are looking for someone to narrate a few minutes of footage, very rare footage in color of baseball players from the 1930s and 1940s, as Kodak in 1934 had given the first motion picture cameras for the public to professional athletes. So Mrs. Babe Ruth would take film of her daughter being pushed on the swing at home by the babe, and then she would take it to the ballpark, and she would take film of the babe. So these two guys went to 100 baseball players' families, because most of them had passed on at this point, and they went into attics, and they found about 50 hours of this footage in color from those two decades, the 30s and 40s. And they decided they would try to make a couple of one-hour documentaries. So I went down to their studio in downtown New York City, and I remember standing in front of a television monitor, and they played 5 minutes of this footage, and they gave me a script, and I looked at the script, and I looked at the screen, and I looked at the script, and I looked at the screen, and made sure I got the timing right, and realized instantly that, gee, I can actually do this. And so I did the 5 minutes, and they said, thank you very much, and they called me back in 6 months. And at that point, I'd been sending tapes out, was getting little odds and ends, voiceover jobs, but not enough to leave the securities industry. And they called me back 6 months later and said, gee, we really like your voice. Would you just come down and read the whole script? Because they want to have a voice to be able to cut the film to get the timing right. So I went down and I read the whole script, and that took an hour, and I didn't really make any mistakes. I was just able to read it through and line it up with the picture. And 6 more months went by, and they called me again and said, gee, we really like your voice, and this time we want you to actually be the narrator of the documentary. And we got famous actors to read the poetry, Roy Scheider and Ellen Burstyn and James Earl Jones and Jack Palance.
Wow. And
they said, but you'll be the narrator. And I said, great. So on a Friday afternoon in the spring of 1991, I went down to HBO Sports in New York City, and I went into the voiceover booth. And again, they just showed the film, and I read the script. And by that time, I knew the script really, really well. So it only took an hour. It only took an hour instead of an afternoon, and it went on the air July 7th of 91. And 4 days later, they called me and said, gee, the thing's a huge success. The number of people writing and calling who wanting to see this is incredible. Would you like to be the voice of HBO Sports? So I said, well, sure, I'd love that. And, of course, as it turned out, being the voice of HBO Sports meant that you really just went down 4 or 5 times a year and spent a Friday afternoon reading stuff, documentary stuff, promos. I mean, how many times could you say this has been a special presentation of HBO Sports? You only need that one time. So there wasn't that much work, but I was narrating documentaries, and I found out relative to other people that I was very quick, that a lot of other people went back and had to do stuff over, and I was just able to just kind of go right through it, and it came very easily to me. So I had all the golf knowledge, which we talked about, and I started to play golf with one of the guys who produced the boxing films. And the more we played, the more my knowledge of the game seeped out. Well, lo and behold, he's the guy who gets the job in 1994 to hire all the on-air talent for the Golf Channel. So he said, how would you like to host TV shows for a new Golf Channel? And I said, yeah, I'd really like that. And he said, maybe on Monday you can host a show with the greatest players in the world. I mean, they already had it all planned out. There was a business plan in place, and Tuesday and Wednesday you could interview the greatest teachers in the world. And I had read every single golf book that I could get my hands on over the previous 30 years. So I'd read every instructional book, and I'd read every biography, and I knew all about these people. And he said, okay, I'm going down to Orlando, because we both lived in New York. And he said, and I'm going to go tell the guys I'm going to hire you. So he called me back, and he said, they don't want to hire you because you've never been on camera before. And he said, I told them that you acted. I told them you were a public speaker. I told them you were really comfortable in front of people. And so what they decided to do was to test my knowledge of golf. And I thought, Perfect. So one night at 3 in the morning in the summer of 1994, my phone rings at 3 a.m. and I pick it up, and it's this guy who used to be with HBO, is now with the Golf Channel, to hiring all these people. And he said to me, "Who was the first famous female golfer?" And I thought about it for a second, and I realized he didn't say the word professional. So I said, well, the first famous female golfer actually was Mary, Queen of Scots, who was caught playing golf the day after her husband, Lord Darnley, had been murdered. And there was a long pause on the other end of the phone, and he said, "Okay, I'll call you back soon." So this went on for weeks. And and then remember, there's no computers, there's no Google, there's no going to your library,
Right.
You're asleep at 3 a.m. But it didn't matter what they asked me. It was all as though it was on the first page of the manual. So the last call, they called me and said, "Okay, who was Sam Parks Jr.?" I knew more about Sam Parks Jr. than his mother did. Sam Parks Jr. lived in Pittsburgh near Oakmont. And the Open was played there in 35. So Sam played 9 holes every single day at Oakmont that he could in the months preceding the U.S. Open. And he did something that nobody else had ever done before. He started to measure distances from trees and fairway bunkers to greens, to the beginning of the green, the middle of the green, the back of the green. And he started to keep a book, which became the first yardage book. Other people got credit for it later, particularly Jack Nicklaus, but it was Sam Parks
Right.
Jr. Now, Sam was really a 75 shooter, but Sam thought that Oakmont was the hardest course in America, which it very well may have been in 1935, and he figured 75s would win the U.S. Open, and 75s won the U.S. Open, and Sam Parks is the guy who shot them. So then there was a really long silence on the other end of the phone again, and the guy said to me, his name was Michael Whale, and he said, "I'll call you tomorrow." So the next day they called, and they offered me the job, and the job started that October when they sent me to Latrobe, Pennsylvania, to spend 3 days with Arnold Palmer, who I did not yet know, to interview him, to play golf with him, to hang out with him, to have dinner with him. And I'll just give you one quick story of what happened the first day. It was a series of miracles, quite frankly, and I'll give you one of the many miracles. We did a 2-hour interview in the morning, and it was a Monday, and the club was closed. So we went down to the range, and he invited the club pro and the club champ to come play golf at the club that day with him and me. And I had my shoes with me, and I brought my clubs with me just in case we were going to play. So we're on the range, and it's just the 4 of us. Again, the club champ, the club pro, me, and Arnold. And Arnold hits 3 or 4 balls, and he looks up at the 3 of us, and he said, "Who can tell me what I'm doing differently?" And the club pro said, "I don't see anything, Arnold." And the club champ said, "I don't see anything, Arnold." And he looked at me and he goes, now we had just done a 2-hour interview, so he knew I knew a lot about him. And he said, "Well, you think you know everything about me. What do you see?" And I said, "For $20, I'll tell you." And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, really." And he said, "Okay, what is it?" And I said, "You have squared your right foot and made it perpendicular to the line of flight during your setup, instead of slightly flaring it as you have done your entire career." And he gave me a look of such disbelief and shock, and he said, "That's absolutely right." And I said, "Let me have my 20. And he said, "We're going to play for it." And I said, "No, I want to be your partner." And he said, "Absolutely not." He said, "I'm going to kick your ass." And that's one of the 5 or 6 things that felt like that moment that happened during the day. Off an incredible relationship that we had together. We ended up watching the O.J. Simpson trial together at that time, and as we were sitting in his home in Latrobe, when the trial actually went on, which was a little bit later, we were sitting there, and he said, "Peter," I did those commercials with O.J., the Hertz commercials. And I said, "Sure, Arn, I remember." And he said, he said he had the worst temper of anybody I've ever been around, at the slightest provocation. He said if somebody just put something on the set that was askew, that his reaction was so disproportionate to the event that had occurred that he turned to me and then said, I absolutely believe he could murder people. And so we had that kind of a relationship, and we had those kinds of conversations. And so by the time the Golf Channel came on the air a few months later, we had really gotten off to as good a start as you could have with another human being. And so when we did that first show, he never asked me what we were going to do. He never asked anybody. He already completely trusted me. And we sit down for the first show, and the producer, again, Michael Whalen, came out, the guy who hired me, and he whispered in my ear before the show, and he said, don't be nervous, you're the right guy for the job. And I said, I'm absolutely not nervous. And the camera went on, and I introduced myself, and I introduced the show, and that was maybe 10 seconds. And at that moment, on the first show, 10 seconds in, I knew it was going to be incredible. And then I introduced Arnold, and I couldn't have been more comfortable. And it turned out to be the best hour of thinking I had that day and every other day that we had a show. I never got in the car and said, oh, I can't believe I didn't think of this, or, oh, I can't believe I said that. I was always stunned, quite frankly, at the risk of being immodest, at how perfectly I was able to recall things, state my questions, do the things that I did to keep the show interesting. And Bob Hope called in, and Dave Marr, who was dying, called in. The first President Bush called in, and the thing went absolutely perfectly. And so that was how I got the job, and that was how it started. And they just left me alone, literally, to do whatever I needed to do to get ready for show, and I did all of it at home. And I would only go into the studio at 6 o'clock at night, get made up, do the show, and I was back in my car at 9:15.
Wow. And it showed, Peter, what a great story. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the preparation that you put into these shows. And obviously you were the right man to start the Golf Channel in that perspective, because I'm going to be quite honest, I've watched, the Golf Channel of late, and I don't mean to be critical, but I don't have the same feeling now that I did during that period when you were on it. And I guess it's just because, and I realize times change and things are different now than what they were at that point, but it was very easy to see that they had the right person for that particular position at that time. Speaking of Arnold Palmer, and obviously other greats like Nicklaus and so many others that we could talk about, I want you to share a Nicklaus story, if you would. And then obviously I know you have a Gene Saracen story as well. Start with Nicklaus first.
Well, let's see. In 1972, I was going to school in San Diego, and at that time they used to have the Tournament of Champions at La Costa, which was about 20 minutes from where I lived in San Diego, and I joined. It was $500 to join the private club, and it was $10 a month in dues, so even I could afford that as a college student. And so I used to go up there all the time, and for some reason, everything pre-Tiger, nobody ever went to golf tournaments. I mean, nobody went to golf tournaments. You could go with your best friend, part ways, and run into each other 15 times during the day, and you could never, of course, do that now. And it was so incredible that I remember in 72, which was the year Jack won the first two legs of the Slam and just missed the Open Championship by a shot at Muirfield, that Lee Trevino won, that on Tuesday, for example, I would walk right down the middle of the fairway with Jack during his practice round. There might be one or two other guys who were interested in doing it. I talked to him all the way around the round. He let me hit chip shots. He let me ask him anything that I wanted to ask him, and I couldn't have been more comfortable. And a round ended, and he said to me, do you want to come over to the range and watch me hit some balls? And I said, yeah, I'd love to, Jack. And I was 21 years old, and so we went to the range, and in those days, the caddies had baseball gloves, and they would all go out into the range, and the players all had shag bags, and they would hit them to their caddy. Well, at that particular instance, I was sitting right next to Jack, right behind him, right where you'd want to sit, 10 feet behind him, 8 feet behind him, and there were 3 or 4 other guys. And Jack waves his caddy, Angelo, another 10 yards. Each wave equaled 10 yards. So he waved him out to 150. So Jack starts hitting 7 irons to 150. And they would bounce once, and then Angelo would catch it and put it in his bag. And the guy next to me says, I can hit my 7 iron 150 yards. And Nicholas looked at him, and then he waved Angie back 10 yards to 160. And he hit his 7 iron 160, 170, 180, 190. And at 190 with his 7 iron, he turned around and said to the fellow next to me, I can hit my 7 iron as far as I want to, but I choose to hit it 150 yards. Now, many years later, when I was at the Golf Channel, we did a show at Jack's house, and he cut my tie off during the show. It was a lot of fun. And after the show was over, he asked me to stick around for a couple hours. So the crew cleaned out, and everybody went home except for me, back to Orlando. And we sat, and we ate, and he starts to show me around the house. And I see this one picture of him in the famous pose with the putter raised from the 1980 U.S. Open that he won over Isao Aoki, with whom he played all 4 days. And I looked at that picture with him, and I said, it's definitely in my top 5 favorite Jack Nicklaus pictures. And he looked at me, and he said, 182. And I said, what do you mean 182? He said, that's what I weighed, 182. And he said, I just wish I looked like that now. And then and it was just another occasion in a long series of data points on the graph where I realized he was just like the rest of us. He liked to look good, and he remembered exactly what he weighed at that particular moment and was really, really proud of it. And we ended up having that kind of relationship in terms of talking about things that were more intimate than what he did or didn't do on a golf course, or his relationship with Bobby Jones or his father, things that we had discussed at great length on and off the air. And I realized that, that we had a great mutual respect. And over time, as more guests came to the Golf Channel, they had seen me enough that they were already pre-comfortable. They knew it was going to be fine. They knew I wouldn't let them get in trouble. They knew they wouldn't be asked anything that would embarrass them in any way. And so, so they were preconditioned to start to think that it would be a positive experience, which made it, so much easier for me. Now, Gene Sarazen, of course, was born in 1902, the same year as Bobby Jones, and he actually won his first major at the age of 20. He won the 22 U.S. Open, and Jones finished second and then won the next year at the age of 21. And Gene invented or refined the sand wedge. We used to have a lot of arguments about where the sand wedge really came from, because I said to him, look, Bobby Jones had one in 1930, and you claim to invent it in 1932. And he'd get all hot and bothered. I knew how to press his buttons. And he would get all hot and bothered and say, that club was deemed illegal. The sole was different than the one that I invented. And Sarazen, in the 1920s and for a long time, lived in Harrison, New York. And that's about a 40-minute ride on the train into New York City. And there were 4 or 5 stops on the way into the city. So in the mid-20s, Gene used to go into the city for various reasons, including to see his business manager, as he was really the first guy to have an endorsement contract, and that was with Wilson, and he had it for over 50 years. And he realized that if he took the train that stopped at Pelham, one of the stops on the way, at 1:15 p.m., that would be where the Ziegfeld Follies showgirls would be getting on the train to go in for rehearsal and for the show that night. So that was his train. So he would get off the train at Pelham, even though he needed to get back on the train, and he would flirt with this one particular blonde who, in his words, wouldn't give him a tumble. That was about 1925. 60 years goes by. Now it's 1985. He's playing as a guest in Bob Hope's celebrity golf tournament. He's now 83 years old. Man comes up to him and says, "There's a woman that wants to see you." And he said, "What does a woman want to do with an old man like me?" And he said, "Well, she asked for you specifically." And he said, "Okay." So he goes over and he goes behind the stands at 18 and meets this woman. And he said he looked at her and he didn't recognize her, and she was blonde. And she said, "Do you remember me?" And he said, again, "I looked her over and I didn't remember her, and I told her so." And she said, "Well, I'm the blonde that you used to flirt with in 1925 on the train tracks at Pelham, and I would just like to introduce myself. My name is Mrs. Bob Hope."
Wow. Wow, what a great story.
Yeah, we
fantastic.
Actually it was a sad ending when he passed away, because in April of '99 there was an event up in Boston before the Ryder Cup in the fall, which was held at the Country Club, that the Americans won on that great final day with Crenshaw as the leader. And there was a big production to raise money and do all sorts of things to promote the tournament a few months before. Well, we had it set up so that Gene would call in from Florida and that we would talk about the early Ryder Cups. And his daughter Marianne told me that, he studied really hard to try to get ready and to anticipate whatever I might want to ask him. And for some reason, we couldn't get the phone to hook up properly so that we could hear him. And I was told the next day by his daughter how unhappy he was and how sad he was, and that he was crying and he was ready and he wanted to do it. And he passed away just a few weeks later. And so it was a sad ending. But I got to spend quite a bit of time with Gene. We used to argue about Bobby Jones. He said, Jones couldn't have gone pro because he wouldn't have been able to handle the steel shafts that came in to vogue after 1930. And I said, "Well, Gene," I said, "Bobby Jones designed the first set of irons with steel shafts for Spalding, and they were the first irons that were designed that had numbers rather than names on them. And Jones had absolutely no problem hitting those golf clubs." So we used to go back and forth, argue about all kinds of things. And it's funny, too, because in 1972, the same year that the Nicklaus story took place, Reggie Jackson and Gene Sarazen were near the first tee, and Gene would have been 70 at the time. And I used to get called a lot to play in games with guys who would come in from other places, because one year I was the club champ at La Costa, and I was a pretty good player, and I was good with people. And so a fellow who sort of ran the club, who was part of the mafia, because it was run by the mafia in those days, and I played with all those guys and hung out with all those guys. And one of those guys said to me one day, "Have you ever considered a life of crime?" And one of them came up to me and said, "Would you like to play with Gene Sarazen and Reggie Jackson?" So I said, "Yeah, absolutely, of course." And Reggie Jackson was already Reggie Jackson, and Gene Sarazen was already Gene Sarazen. And so we played 18 holes, and on the third hole, Reggie and I figured out that we were both dating the same girl. She was the girl who was running the gift shop, and he started to talk about this beautiful blonde in the gift shop, and he'd been dating her. And I said, "Is it Becky?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "I date her too." So we got off to a really, really good start. And I wanted the three of us to go out to dinner because I wanted to hang out with him. I mean, I liked her, but I was more interested in spending time with him and talking baseball and all sorts of stuff. And Sarazen shot 70 or 71. He never curved the ball. He was 70 years old, and we played from 6,600 or even right around there. And in a good wind, because it was La Costa, was near the Pacific Ocean, and he hit the ball incredibly straight. It never curved. And I said to him, "Was there a time that you curve the ball, or was there a time that you learned that no matter what was going on, your ball wouldn't curve? And he said, yes. He said, in 1923, I played with Harry Vardon, who was the first man and the only man to win 6 British Opens and was the greatest player in the world from 1995 to 1914 or so, when he won his last British Open. But in 1923, he was 53 years old, and they're playing in a tournament, and the first hole's a par 3, and there's a strong wind blowing from right to left. So Sarazen aims a little right of the green towards the bunker and kills his shot, and it never veered offline, and it went into the bunker. And Vardon said to him on the second tee, don't allow for the wind. He said, you hit the ball so solid, and it's such a medium-low trajectory, he said, that it will take a gale to blow your balls offline. He said, so not only should you not allow for the wind, he said, but you should go for as many pins as you possibly can because you're so straight. And you'll figure out a way, if you're aggressive and miss a pin, how to get the ball up and down and make your par so that you can move to the next hole and try to do it again. And he said, from that point forward, he said, I basically had never allowed for the wind. When he won the British Open in 1932, he said he ignored the wind, and he certainly ignored it that day, and everything came off his club like a bullet. He was 70 years old.
Wow. What a great story. Peter, I want to ask you, and then I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your podcast, Reading the Break. But, we've obviously seen so many great players, some of whom you've mentioned here tonight, and obviously another one, Tiger Woods, has also done some incredible feats, if you will, on the course. But we really haven't seen since Tiger anybody that's dominated. Obviously, there was Jack, and then along comes Tiger. Why do you think that is, that we're not seeing anybody dominate the sport like we once did?
Well, first of all, there's a couple of things. There have been 2 kinds of dominations since the 1890s. In the 1890s, there was a group of 3 guys called the Great Triumvirate, and they won between them about 16 British Opens, and that was James Braid and J.H. Taylor and Harry Vardon. So they were the Great Triumvirate, but Vardon was the best player. Then you come to the 1920s, and you had an American Great Triumvirate because you had Jones, Hagen, and Sarazen, but Jones was the best player. Then you had Nelson, Snead, and Hogan all come up at the same time. Then in the 1960s, you had Arnold, Jack, and Gary, but Jack was the best player and would be for 20 consecutive years from 1960. So even though there have been lots of occasions where there have been a triumvirate of players at the top, one of them was better than the other guys. And in Jack's case, he could hit it farther than anybody else, and he could overpower a golf course, and he was the best thinker, and he was the best lag putter, which people don't particularly find themselves aware of or appreciate, because he never played for pins. He just played for the fat of the green, and he either made his birdie putt or he knew he'd lag it up and then just tap it in. And he didn't want to chip, and he didn't want to hit bunker shots. And he once said to me, I said, did you ever work on your short game? And he said, not really. He said, I didn't need one because, he said, I hit 16 greens around, and he said, in the 2 greens I missed, I knew I could chip it to 10 feet, and he said, there's no way I was going to miss a 10-footer. Actually, Weiskopf told me a funny story that they were playing in the Ryder Cup, and Weiskopf had a 10-footer for birdie, and it was best ball, and Jack had a 15-footer. So Tom said, do you want me to move my mark? And Jack said, no, just pick up your mark and put it in your pocket. Rack your cue. And Weiskopf said, what are you talking about? I have a shorter birdie putt than you do. And Jack said, well, there's not any possible way that I'm going to miss my putt. And Weiskopf said he knocked it in, and he just couldn't believe it. So then from 1980 until Tiger arrived in late 96, you had a revolving cast of characters. You had Curtis Strange, and you had Tom Kite, and you had Nick Faldo, and you had Nick Price, and you had Greg Norman, and you had Seve Ballesteros, and you had Tom Watson, and they sort of took turns. Even though Greg was number 1, for 331 weeks, but he only won 2 major championships. So Faldo, from really 87 till Tiger arrived, was, in my view, the best player because he won 6 majors from 87 through 96, including, of course, the one in 96 where he beat Jack at the Masters. So then Tiger comes on the scene, and he's Jack Nicklaus. He can overpower the golf course. In the early part of his career, in his palmiest days, he was the straightest driver on tour and the longest driver on tour. And he was usually number 1 in greens in regulation. And he was the best putter. And he was the best chipper. And he could hit it farther than anybody else. So that's a lot of advantages to have on the field. He could overpower the course, and he could overpower the other players and play better from where his drive landed because he had less club and he was better with those clubs anyway. What's happening now is a couple of things in my view. One, the equipment has become a great equalizer. The ball goes very far, and there are a great number of players who can hit the ball on occasion 350 yards. There isn't one player who's a whole bunch longer than the next group of players like Jack was, like Jones was when he chose to be, like Tiger was. So when you have so many guys who are hitting the ball that straight and that far, nobody's overpowering the field. And they vary in how good they are from their tee ball to the green. I mean, Jordan Spieth's, considered generally about the best iron player, but Dustin Johnson's become a better wedge player, but Rory's a terrible putter. So the equipment has made it very difficult to separate yourself from the field, but there's something more important than that. If the hardest thing to do in golf is to win important tournaments and major championships, almost equally as difficult is to be consistent enough to always contend. In the 1970s, Jack played in the 40 major championships. He won 8 of them. That's 20%. He finished second 8 times. That's another 20%. So he was first or second 40% of the time. He was always there. And I think out of those 40, he was in the top 10 35 out of 40 times and missed 1 cut. That's consistency. Jordan Spieth has more missed cuts now at just under 20, and when Tiger, through 2008, had a total of 5 when he was 32, and of course Jordan's not even 25 yet. So it's the inability of the best players in the world to be consistent from week to week that has them changing position all the time because nobody can keep it up. Give you an example of somebody who doesn't keep it up. Look at the career of Phil Mickelson. His whole career has been built on 2 or 3 good weeks a year for his whole career. Never won anything at the end of the year. Never won the money title, never won the most tournaments, never won stroke average, was never the player of the year. It was always built on 2 or 3 good weeks a year, and he won 43 times with 5 majors, and he now goes down as one of the greatest players who ever lived, particularly compiling that record in the era of Tiger. So consistency is the thing that would separate one of these 3 or 4 players from the other 3 or 4 players. And nobody's demonstrated an ability. Justin Thomas has done it beautifully in the last year to be there all the time. You can't win if you're not there, and you need to be there all the time or close there too to be able to close out your chances, because there's going to be a few guys in the field maybe that are 50th on the money list or 5th on the money list who will play the best 4 rounds of their life, and you're not going to win that major championship. Those things happen. That's why you get surprise winners occasionally at majors. So it's the consistency that's required to be the best player, and that's the only way you can separate yourself now because the equipment won't let you do it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And Nicklaus has been very vocal about that for many years. That the equipment is, particularly the golf ball, has really, in a lot of ways, hurt the game. I want to ask you, Peter. We've literally, gosh, I hate to say this, but we're almost out of time. But I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your podcast.
Warmed up.
Yeah, I know. listen, Peter, I'm gonna throw this out there now, but I want to give you an opportunity first to talk a little bit about Reading the Break, your podcast, so that the audience can get a little idea for those that maybe haven't tuned into your show, how they can do that, but a little bit about the program.
Well, make that one short because it's not so interesting. I had a podcast that ran for a while, and people weren't listening to podcasts, so I stopped doing it. And then a whole bunch of people came to me and said, "Oh, you got to do another podcast." And so I listened to a bunch of golf podcasts, and they're all an hour, and they all seem like TV shows without a picture. And I thought, this isn't interesting, and what am I going to, how am I going to make mine different? Even though I had done 10 years of radio on Sirius XM, so I understood the format. It's just radio, and so I thought, all right, I'm not going to do that, but what I will do is I'll do 7 to 10 minute podcasts, and I'll tell stories just like the kinds of stories I've told you here tonight. And so I did 7 podcasts. There are 7 minutes, 10 minutes. I think a few of the stories I've told tonight are in there, and you can just listen to them on my website, peterkessler.com, and you don't have to go to SoundCloud or iTunes. You just go to peterkessler.com. But I stopped doing them because I started to write a book, and in the book, I wanted to put the stories that I was using up in the podcast. And so I stopped doing podcasts, and I started writing the book and putting the things in the book that otherwise would have made its way onto the podcast. I'm also working with a group of brilliant guys who think that we have an opportunity together to get me on camera again and do the kinds of things that I used to do. Now, every year somebody comes to me, literally every year somebody comes to me and says, "Would you like to do TV again?" And I always say, well, yeah, it's the only thing I know how to do. And you need 2 things. You need distribution. You need a channel, a network, a television station, and you need ad dollars. And every year when somebody's come to me, it's fallen through because they didn't get one or the other, or in most cases, both. But some people came to me recently who have the ability to give me distribution, a place to show things, and another group who's affiliated with this one who has a proven track record of raising advertising dollars before you go on the air, before you build up the audience. So I'm working with an incredible group of fellas, and we're in the very early stages, and we might be able to create something that's very, very special that the next time we do the show together, hopefully I'll be able to talk about in greater detail. So I've written the prologue, and I've written 3 chapters of the book, and the book just feels like the show that we've just done together. It's in my voice, and it's these stories, and it talks about exactly what we talked about tonight, how I got to the Golf Channel. And Jim Dodson, who I think is the best golf writer, I called him when I got his book from Simon & Schuster. They send me all the golf books, and I opened it up because my family's been after me for 15 years to write a book, and I keep saying I can't think of anything. And Jim Dodson's book came, and in the prologue, it was how he went from writing for newspapers to becoming maybe the best-selling golf book writer in the world. And then the first chapter he spends with a woman who was a great player in the 1920s, Glenna Colette Vare, and she's now in her 80s, but she won't talk about golf, and they go driving in the car, and she makes some pie, and they take the dog for a walk, and I thought, whoa, I can do the prologue like that, talk about how I got from nowhere to the Golf Channel, and then I can have a series of chapters of the time that I've spent with the greatest players in the world of the last century. So I called Dodson. I said, Jimmy, I just got your book. I said, I think I can write a book using your formula. And he said, of course you can. He said, you're the only living person who's interviewed everybody from the last century who played great golf or who taught great golf. And he said, these stories must be told, and I'll write the foreword, and you're the only one who can write this, so get to work. And so I started to write the book, and then I haven't done very well on it lately because I'm working a little bit on this other project. And, if I have more visibility and people can see me somewhere, then it'll be easier for me to have a book that's popular because people who don't know me will get to know me for the first time, and there may be an interest in the book. And then my fans who have been incredibly loyal since the Golf Channel days will read the book. And so right now, it's a muddle of things, but it's an interesting time, and we'll see what happens with this on-camera stuff and the book and the podcast, which I may change to doing current events, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do.
Well, Peter, it sounds like you've got a lot of things, a lot of irons in the fire, if you will, and I know that every one of them are going to be successful. It's truly been an honor, Peter, to have you as my guest tonight, and for sure, if you're willing, I will definitely have you come back on. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to everything that I wanted to get to tonight, and I'm sure that you would like to talk about, but I will. Well,
I get a little long-winded.
Now, I love it, though. I mean, Peter, you're a treasure as far as I'm concerned in this business. As you said, you've interviewed so many great, not only people in the golf profession, but celebrities and those alike that have somehow or other either used golf or contributed to golf or even just played golf. And I know you have at least 1 million or more stories that you could share. So I will make you a formal invite here tonight on the show to come back anytime you want, and we'll coordinate, obviously, a date that's convenient for you. But thank you, Peter, for giving of your time. As I said earlier, I enjoyed listening and watching you on your earlier days on the Golf Channel. You made it an enjoyable experience for me, and I thank you for that.
Well, let me tell you something. I've known about you for a while, and I had a number of people say to me that I should do your show, and so I listened to it a few times, and I thought I definitely want to do that show because this guy kind of reminds me of me a little bit because he really does his homework. He asks great questions. He gets out of the way. He understands how it works. He's really popular. People have come to me on Facebook and Twitter and mentioned your show. And, of course, it's called Golf Talk Live, which was the name of my show, and I'm totally flattered by that. And so, really, for me, it's a great privilege to come on the show because you are extremely well regarded, you are extremely well prepared, you are elegant, and you are eloquent, and it was an absolute thrill to spend the time with you.
Well, I'm going to take that those accolades and run with it, Peter. Thank you very much for all of that. And, you have truly been an inspiration, not just with your knowledge of the industry, but just how you've presented yourself over the years. And, I don't believe in copying what somebody else does, but if I can learn from that experience and somehow work it together with what I have to offer, then I feel like I'm going down the right path. So thank you for those compliments. And I try to do that with the people that have been on the show, and I think that's obviously the reason they keep coming back. And I know if I keep mixing it up a little bit more each and every year, as I plan to do for next season, I know that they'll continue to follow. And but Peter, thank you very much for doing this show tonight. It's been, as I said, an honor and a pleasure to have you here, and I will definitely have you come back anytime you want.
Dude, you're one of the best of the business. I'll come back anytime. You've got my number. You got my email. You've got and you know how to get a hold of me. Send up a smoke signal. I'll be there.
Sounds good. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Kessler, thank you very much for being my guest.
My pleasure.
All right. Good night. All right, that was my very special guest, Peter Kessler. Unfortunately, we ran out of time for tonight, but I want to say a special thank you to all of you, the listeners out there, for faithfully tuning in each and every week here to Golf Talk Live. I'll see you next week with another great round of Coach's Corner and, of course, another insightful guest here on the program. So make sure you tune in next Thursday at 6 p.m. Central right here on Golf Talk Live. God bless everybody.